Okay, so up to Hill Gemara. I believe yesterday you guys got up to Boy Minei Merav Yanai, which is about 8 lines from the bottom on the Kuf base on the base. Zok Gemara, interesting shaila. Boy Minei Merav Yanai. Seicher Omer Nesati, Umasker Meloditalti. The Seicher claims I paid my rent. The master claims I didn't receive anything. Al mi lahavi raya. Who has to bring the raya that in fact they paid or that they didn't receive? Zoktamar Amos. When during a month did this dispute occur? If we're still in the middle of a month, and the halacha is ein schiris mishtalemes el b'soif, so rent isn't due on the first of the month, rent is due on the last of the month. So ibisech mani tanina, we have a mishnah that tells us the halacha. Ilachas mani tanina, and if we're at the end of the month, we also have a brisa. Ditnan we learned. Meis ha'av b'soich shloshim yom. Now the halacha is when someone has a child, a ben zachar who's a bechor, the father has to be paid to the child. Now, technically, if you were paid to the child before the child is 30 days old, the pidyon would work. The chiyuv to be paid really starts at 30 days. So what happens, if a child, a little baby, becomes a Yosy and his father dies before the child is 30 days old, and we don't know, did he make a pidyon ben yet or not? Does this child now have to be paid himself or not? So Mesa Abatok Shloshim Yom, Becheskas Shaloi Nifta. It's Becheskas Shaloi Nifta. We'll assume the father did not yet make the pidyon ben. Why? Because it's not due, and people normally don't pay things before they're due. Achiyavi Raya Shenifta, unless we could bring some type of proof that the father did pay the child earlier, then he won't have to be paid himself. We have to assume that he wasn't paid. But if it's ready after the time that there's a thief to make a pidyon ben, then we have to assume that he made a pidyon ben. So you see clearly from here that if it's during the month and the rent isn't due, the assumption is that the sucker didn't pay. If it's after the month is over, where the rent is already due, the assumption is that the sucker paid already. So what is your shaila exactly? Who's believed the sucker or the master? We're talking about the last day of the month. So the question is, on the last day of the month, would someone pay on that last day or not? Since we don't know, that is the shaila. Could we assume that the secher paid, or can we assume that the secher didn't pay? Guess what? We have a mishnah or a brisa that also farmers this shaila as well. Now we could turn on to daf of Gimel, Aleph, which is today's daf. Schir bismanoi nishpa v'noitu. The halacha is if an employee goes to the employer and tells his employer, "You didn't pay me yet, please pay me," and the owner says, "I did pay." The halacha is normally when you're teveya somebody, the nitfa has to swear that he's pater from paying, and then he's pater from paying. But the chacham made a takana. A worker generally remembers if he was paid or not. The employer deals with so many different employees. How could he possibly keep track if he paid or not? Therefore, we remove the shvua from the nitfa, from the balabos, and we put the shvua on the poil, and we let the poil swear that he wasn't paid, and therefore he gets to get paid. So schir bismanoi nishpa v'noitel. But schir bismanoi means at the end of the day that he's supposed to get paid, he swears and he could demand the money. So to Gemara schirhu the ramu rabbanon shvuale dafke by a schir where the rabbanon gave him the right to make the shvua. Mishum the balabayis torah b'playalav, because the balabayis is torah and he will not remember if he paid it. That's a special allowance made to an employee. But when you're talking about a landlord and a tenant, Seicher Meheman B'Shvua, the nitva meaning the owner of the property is being toiveya, is renter, is tenant, and saying pay. The socher will be believed with a shvuah, because the only exception to that is the takana that the chum made for a worker. So we have pshitas did that as well. Okay, hayoim shmoina v'arbon yoim shem shisha shavuos v'shisha yom loimer. Amar Rav Nachman. Hi man, the oiger lebeisel l'chavri. Somebody rented a house to his friend le'esher shnin for 10 years. V'chosav l'shtar, and he wrote a star that I'm Reuven who's renting this house to Shimon for 10 years. The problem is the star doesn't detail when the rental terminated or when the rental started, which 10 years. The Amarlay, and what happened was Nikitas Chameshon. The landlord tells the tenant, today you've already lived as a renter in my property for 5 years, you only have 5 years left. The renter could add, what do you mean? I've only been here for 2 years. In other words, they're arguing about what day the 10-year term began, and therefore when it will end. Mehemen, the maskir is believed. Based on what you're saying. If I lend you $100 and I have a star that says I lent you $100, and the loiva says I already paid half. Are you telling me, Hachadnami the Mehemen? Are you going to tell me that the malva is believed and he could force the fellow to pay? I'm sorry, if I'm putting a Bava, Hachadnami the Mehemen, are you telling me that the loiva is believed to say he paid half? The guy had a star that says you owe him $100. So here you have a soicher that has a star that says he rented for 10 years. Why should you believe? The whole purpose of that star, when a loiver writes a star to a malva, is so that the malva can collect. If in fact you already paid half, why in the world is there no indication of that? Either when you paid back half, you should have seen to it that on the star itself it was written that 50% of the loan was paid back. Or you should have a receipt that would prove in writing that you paid back half. When there's a star written for a rental contract, you know what the malva will say. I don't have to prove anything. The reason why I wrote you the star has nothing to do with proving that I only owe to you for 10 years. If you're living in my property for 10 years, what am I going to do if after 10 years you make a claim that it's your property? I was sat at the property. I was there for 10 years, and the Baal was not ma'ayir. You'd have a chazaka. So the purpose of the star is just to indicate that it was a rental. We've never discussed as part of the star that the star is going to prove when you started, when you finished. The whole purpose of the star is just so that you could never make a claim of ownership against the property, because I'll prove that you were there because of a rental. But as far as when it started, when it finished, to my property, and I'm believed. But Avada, he would be believed. Zot Rashi, the loitema, that you shouldn't ever be able to make a claim that that you purchased it from me. Not that once you have the star, you'll always be able to say, oh, my 10 years is starting now. That's not why I gave it. So this star is not a star raya of the rental itself. It's just a raya that there was a rental, and therefore you cannot claim that you have it for 10 years. Okay, so up to Gemara weiter. Amar Abnachman. Abnachman said, Shoyl Adam B'tuvoi Loi. What happens if a guy goes to his friend and says, can I borrow your axe as long as the axe is good? Shoyl Adam B'tuvoi is a term to describe someone asking for something as long as it's in good working. I want to borrow your axe as long as it's in good working condition. The halacha is that loan lasts forever. You're allowed to keep that axe and use it and use it and use it until it's until it's just worn out, and then you give back the broken pieces to the owner. Amar Mori Bara de Bashlu. The only way it's such a commitment that you're entitled to keep it, and the marshal can't demand that you give it back to him, is if you made a kinyan at the time where he committed to work through a kinyan to lend you this object as long as it's in good working condition. Amar Amori Barei Ravashi. And once it breaks and the handle breaks off the metal blade or the metal blade is ruined, then you give them back the pieces, because at that point your rental ends once it's no longer in good working condition. Omar Haiman, the Omar Leilachavri, Ushman Mora Lemirpak Bay Hyperdisa. I want to borrow your hoe because I want to loosen up the soil on this particular partis. So the halach is that's exactly what he's allowed to do. Rafik Bay Ho Partisa. He's allowed to soften up the soil of this particular partis as per the instructions of when he borrowed it. What he said, partisa, I would like to soften up the earth in a partis without specifying which one. Then the law is Rafik Ba call partisa the boy. He can use this hoe to soften up the soil in any partis, even if it's a huge partis, he's entitled, because the deal was one partis, but any partis that the borrower would pick. What if he said? Pardise, my pardise, multiples. Then Rafik ve'ozul kol pardise de isle. He could use this hoe to continue working on field after field or orchard after orchard after orchard until the axe is completely run down, worn out, with the hose completely run down and worn out. And all he has to get back at the end are the worn out pieces. Omar Papa, I want to borrow your well. I guess he had a well. He could borrow the well to use it to irrigate his fields with or whatever else he might need to water. The Nofla. But what happened was the walls of the well caved in, and now the well is in bad need of repair. Allah is loy bani. The soil can't just fix it for itself and then continue to use it, because he said a high gargus. This bar, once it breaks, the marshal is not mukhliv anymore. He's released from his contract because it's not high gargus anymore. If you're going to fix it, it's not considered that well. But if
Yosy,
yes,
what's the chiddush that if somebody makes a tnai that he could be mekayim tnai? All these stories, if he said this, then he could do this. Sure, man. Every country.
I guess the chiddush is that v'loy amrinon. In the last case, Rashi says the chiddush is v'loy amrinon trei pardisai hu deka'amalei. Maybe if I said pardisai, I meant to allow you for every partis. Maybe it's tavasta rubula tefasta. Miut pardisai is two. Maybe I only meant two. As a matter of fact, Tosfos has a whole shak libertaria. Why taka? We made a deal. I said you can use my axe for multiple pardesim. Why does that give you unlimited? Maybe it only means two. Mechadesi means more than two. So that's a very big chiddush that it's limited to two. Maybe we'll take a peek at Tosfos. It's a little bit late, but maybe we'll take a peek at Tosfos. Ask why taka don't you say to fast and rule to fast? So let's just finish off. Gargusov v'nafla loy banila. Gargusov, I said I'll lend you a well v'nafla and it caved in banila. Then he could fix it over. Bei gargusov. What if he said, I want to borrow from you not a well, but a site where I could build a well? Well, then Kori v'ozol kama garguse ba'aray. He's allowed to dig as many wells as he wants in the marshal's property until he finds a geshemaka well that's going to produce geshemaka amounts of water. But this commitment is only if a kinyan was made. Let's take a quick peek into that Tosfos, who asks, why taka don't you say miyut shnayim. So Toshus asks us in Toshus, the bottom Toshus, Partisi Rafik, they call Partisi this way. In time of Frek Toshus, Tomer Beresh, Amoicha Shabayis, Ara Tarti Mashma. Normally, you say that when it says when you use a plural lotion, it means to meet the plural is two. So when they skip the Toshus, there it's the Yeshleimer, almost halfway down the Toshus. Then it have to go by Mecher. Only by a Mecher. The ein lonu loimer shemocher kol kar ela hapachos. By mecher, the logic is the seller means to sell the minimum that multiple means, which is two. However, aval b'shela, when we're borrowing, einay makmid the mashal kol. It's norm that someone would lend somebody something for its complete use. There's another scenario you could say. The hasam yad lekecha tachtoin. When you're talking about a mecher, we always say yad lekecha al tachtoina, sham moicher muchzik, because the moicher is muchzik in what he's selling, and the lekech wants to extract it from the moicher. Metzia mechaver all of haraya, and therefore miyut of a plural lashon is shnai. But v'hacha yad hamashal al tachtoina. Here the yad hamashal al tachtoina shashoyel muchzik. The shoyel has it. The mashal wants it back. The shoyel says, "No, I'm allowed to use it until I finish all my fields." The Mashal said, "No, I only meant two." So you have the shoyel being the muksuk, that's why he's them. Okay, let's see the heilige Mishnah weiter. A masker buys like a someone lent a house, someone rented a house to his friend, the nofal, and the house collapsed. The halacha is, I have a contract. The contract is for the term of the contract, I have to provide you with a house. I have to build you another house. Yesterday we learned, what if someone term of rental is over and the house collapsed after the term of rental was over? So there the Gemara said the owner could say, just like if my house would have collapsed, I would have had a problem. So you have the same problem, right? The case was where the house might have collapsed in the middle of the winter, where you're normally not allowed to evict, but the contract is over. There, we said the Balabais doesn't have to make a new house. But here we're in the middle of the specified contract term. There he's mechuyev to build another house. And they have to build a house with the same specifications as the house that collapsed. Therefore, if it was a small house, he's not allowed to make a bigger house. The renter could say, no, I prefer a small house. I don't want a big house. Or gadol, it's an katan. That's one big room.
Yosy, why can't the Balabai simply say, listen, it's an inus. I'm putter. I don't have to get you a house. I'm sorry. It was an earthquake. It was an act of God. It wasn't negligence.
It doesn't matter. You made a contract, and the contract was mechayiv you to provide him a dwelling.
Yeah, but if the same way that the
act of God is not a way out of the contract, unless it's written in the contract. Yeah, some contracts say, I'm not responsible if it's an act of God. If there's an act of God, I'm not mechuyev to continue providing with the house. But the stam contract didn't have that.
You're making the balabais into a shoyel.
I'm sorry?
You're making the balabas into a shoyel. He's going to be chayav on everything.
The balabais made himself into a shoyel. Balabais himself obliged himself to provide a dwelling.
All I'm saying is he shouldn't be worse than a shomer's tucher, than somebody who got paid.
I don't know that we made a deal. I'm going to provide you with a house under all circumstances. If you made an exclusion in your contract, then yeah, he wouldn't have to. But the contract had no exclusions.
If a fire, the landlord has to rebuild it.
I'm sorry?
If an apartment building has a fire, the landlord has to
most buildings lease, most modern day leases state that if there's a fire, an act of God, and the building becomes inhabitable, we have a right to cancel your lease. My brother Moshe rents his office in the same building as the Torah Avodah, and there was smoke damage. They have to fix the building, so he got a notice: your lease is terminated. You got to be out within 3 days because they're fixing it over. But that's because that's what it says in the lease. But if it doesn't say that in the lease, then the owner would, in order to honor the terms of his agreement, would have to provide a new house.
Yosy, mishabt noch act of God, or does it gleich schon nicht?
That's a good question. Okay, so Dr. Gemara.
Yosy?
Yes.
Is the ball on the damages?
I'm sorry?
Is the Baal Mechuyev for any damages the house collapsed?
I'm not able to hear.
Is the owner Mechuyev for any damages that may have caused from the house being
I don't know. I know in by renters you have to have your own content insurance. So you wonder what if his house caused damage to the what if his house caused damage to the renter? Well, that would probably depend on if it could fit into any one of the four categories: shor, bor, mav, or hever. If it could fall into one of the four categories of mazik, then maybe there would be a chiyuv. It all depends on if it fits into one of the categories, because the Torah the lists off, when my possessions damage your possessions, when I'm chayiv. If my shor damages your shor, if my bor damages you. So if it fits into one of those categories, maybe they would be able to be b'chayiv the owner. Okay, so let's see the word weiter. So if you have two small rooms, you don't make one big room. If you have one big room, you can't make two small rooms. The same amount of windows that the old house had, the new house will have to have. And you're not allowed to add more windows unless they both agree. Under what circumstances does he have to provide this exact home? No. If he said bayis, I'm renting you this house, meaning I'm not being mechayiv myself in my contract to provide you a home. This home, then nafal ozalei. Then if the house collapses, I'm potter, because I said I'm mechayiv myself to give you this home. This home is no longer in existence. Our lease has been terminated. Idam lebayistam. If the master said, no, I will give you a house, so then don't look at the house that I gave you. Look at the lease agreement. The lease agreement said bayistam, meaning I have to give you a house. So you're right, I still have to build you a new house. But who said I have to build it with the exact same specs as the home that's collapsed? So where do you have a case where you're specifying a house that would demand that you provide an exactly the same house, but whenever you're specifying a house, by definition, I'm not mechuyev if it falls down, because I was only mechayiv myself to rent you this house and not another house. Omer Shlokish, I have a simple solution. The Omer lay, bayis shani maskirloch midas arch kach lekach. I'm renting you a house, and therefore, if it collapses, I'm mechuyev to give you another one. But I'm going to provide with you a detailed specification of the house that I'm going to be providing for you. So there, if it falls down, you mechuyev to build another house, and you mechuyev to build it with the same specs that the lease dictated those specs. In fact, the more you have to remember, do I need a mission to tell me that if you write a lease that says that I'm mechuyev to give you a house no matter what, and the specs of the house are A, B, and C, I need a mission to tell me that you have to stick to such a deal? Ella, I'll tell you what happened. He pointed to a specific house. He says, I'm going to rent you a house that's just like this house, and he's pointing to that house. What does he mean by just like this house? In fact, if I'm saying just like this house, so once again, the specs are clearly identified. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah that I have to build a house with those some specs? So the koya guded in the hara. This was a beautiful beachfront home. Ma'odetema, Micah said, the koya guded in the hara. He didn't mean that it has the same physical specs of that house, the same amount of windows, the same amount of doors, same amount of stories, same size. No, I just meant the house that I'm going to rent you will also be a beachfront house. But exactly how it's built, maybe that's not what he meant in the contract. Kamash Malon, that no, when someone says like this, it means exactly like this. Its location, its specification, its size, exactly like this. And that is the chiddush of the Mishnah. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were to finish Perek HaShoyel. Hadin Allah HaShoyel. Hadin Allah HaShoyel. Hadin Allah HaShoyel.
Be'ezus Hashem.
Be'ezus Hashem is Baruch, I believe native. Zog the Hilig Mishnah. Hamakabel Soda Mechaveri. If someone is makabel a field from his friend, and this is talking about arisos or chekiris. So someone owns a field, but he's not prepared to work it. So you have a worker who makes a deal with the owner. I will work your field, and I will get to keep half, or a third, or a quarter of the produce of the field. or I'll pay you rent for the field. I'll give you a certain amount of bushels of wheat per year. So the question is, what is the responsibility of this farmer who undertook to take care of this field? If the meaning of that city is where the Makabal doesn't just plant and cultivate, but he actually cuts down the wheat at the end of the season, then that's what he has to do. Lakar, if the meaning is that he doesn't just cut and then leave the stubble, he actually uproots the whole plant, so there's clean earth left, then that's what he has to do. Lach rosh acharov, if the minig is that he has to actually plow and take away any small residual roots that are growing, then Yachrosh will have to do that as well. Hakol Kaminak Hamadina, it's all based on what are the norms in that city. The same way they have the agreement to take tuah, for instance, half or a third or a quarter, the straw that they cut or the stalks that they don't eat, the stalks they also split, and there's value there. So the sharecropper gets his portion, the buyer gets his portion. Uvekash, kash is straw that's still in the ground. So when you cut down tuah, there's kash remaining on the ground. That also gets split. There's value to it. And if it's a vine that we're talking about, we say Hashem shechok and biyayin, the same way they each take their share of the wine, kach chok and bizmuros, they do split as well the twigs that they would get out of this vine. Let's turn over to the base. Uvakonim, and Rashi says that konim are sticks that you would put into the ground to support the vines. Ushneim nisapkin as a konim, and they both have to provide that. So at the beginning of the season, when they plant the vine, they have to support the vine. They have to buy sticks. They each have to chip in to pay for those sticks. Tana we learned. If the minig is that you just cut and you leave the stubble in the ground, you're not allowed to pull it out of the ground completely, because maybe the owner wants the remaining stubble there to act as a fertilizer for the field. Lakar, if the minig was a totally uproot, and you're sure elixir, you don't have a right to cut because maybe the owner wants the land free and clear. And either party has a right to demand that the other party does what the minig hamadina is. Therefore, lixar einer shelaker. Hi Omar, but you know the titzin li aroi. The owner could say the reason why I don't want you to be oikert, I want you to leave the stubble, is because there's a benefit to my field that stubble will end up becoming like a fertilizer. The high Omar loimatin, and if the violin wanted a kiro and the sharecropper didn't want, the sharecropper could say, that's not my responsibility. It's too much work to make a kiro, and the minig is to make kitzira. Okay, lakar eina rishai liktzar. The minig was to be oiker, be kosher again. Hi Omar the tinker arodi. The owner could say, I want the akira because I want my land clean. Hi Omar be'ina tivna. And the other one could say, no, I want to keep that because I want that as heaven. Ushneim ma'akvin zelza. Ushneim ma'akvin zelza lamali. Why is it that the brisa sticks in at the end? Ushneim ma'akvin zelza. Why isn't it enough to say makom shenhakar lixar iner shoy laker, laker iner shoy lixar? That tells me everything I need to know. Why do we need the extra wording of Ushneim ma'akvin zelza? Zok to Gemara. It's matam kam. It's just giving an explanation for the halacha. Matam lixar iner shoy laker. And laker iner shoy lixar is mishum dishneim ma'akvin zelza. It's because each one has a right to be mark of the other one from deviating from the norms. What if the minig was to totally plow the field to eliminate any residual growth? That's what it has to do. Of course. Let's say it's a land where the minig was that during the growth of the produce, the farmer does not have to weed and prune. And the farmer went the extra mile, weeded and pruned, meaning there's going to be much less psilas left in the karka. Now that he weeded and pruned, he thinks to himself, maybe now I shouldn't have to make the charisha, because while it was growing, I weeded and pruned. Now the tema amalei. Maybe the farmer could say to the owner, you know why I weeded and pruned? Is that died to like so I shouldn't have to plow it later. If you want to substitute nechisha for harisha, that should have been specified in the contract. Since you didn't, you're mechuyev on the norms. What extra issue is there that the mission doesn't say the farish? What if we make a deal that I'm going to take care of your property this year? In other words, I'm going to plant wheat. Now, there happen to be dotted throughout the property some trees. Do I also get a chelik of the trees? Or maybe the Bava says, no, the deal we made was just to plant wheat and to deal with the wheat. The trees are mine. So and therefore he would take a portion of it. Why would I think otherwise? If that's the minute, that's the minute. So what would happen if normally the sharecropper would take 2/3 and the owner would get 1/3? And here the balabais was willing to only take a quarter. So the balabais in the deal was taking less than what the going rate was. Maybe the balabais would say, I gave you a better deal. I took a smaller cut of the wheat that you're going to produce. You know why I did that? I did that because I also intend to keep the pears of the tree that I wasn't going to give you. If you wanted to deviate from the norms, you would have to specify. Charging less doesn't prove anything. So the Gemara asks the same thing. Shita. Everybody normally allows only a quarter. And now the case was where the farmer took less. Now the time you would say, the reason why I gave you more than the norm is that I did the obviously be honest. It's because the farmer claims I thought I would get from the Persa Ilam. Once again, it has to be specified. So we better stop here because it's already 5 to 7. So we'll stop here and we'll not for tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm landing at about 10 after 5. So I'm hoping to be able to be on time to be there in person. If not, I'll just turn on my computer and I'll log in again.
Yosy, gebe be'adus. If the shal is, die makes back him a cheesecake when the vibes at Shiva, there's such as I'm noch the Shiva.
Was?
I'm going away for Shvius, so I'll probably have to check in on the telephone if I'll be able.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm going out of town. I won't be in. But I will give my cheesecake. But die makes back him because it's going to be after the Shiva when you come back. No?
Yeah.
Verstehen die? Die Schale ist, wenn ich gebe es ihm, dann war es erst, weil er ist da.
Dus is een jaar,
Was?
Dus is een jaar,